my reflections on Dr. Martin Luther King, on the national holiday celebrating his birthday. And my reflections aren't necessarily any more significant than anyone else's. I'm simply taking a moment to record them. The first conversation I remember having about Dr. King was with my dad. I was sitting in the front seat of our van. I was in 5th grade. And I remember asking him if he thought that Dr. King would be president based on what I knew of Dr. King at that time, had read of his following and of his words. He seemed like a viable candidate. And I remember my dad saying Dr. King was a great man, and he didn't know if he would be elected in America. I don't remember the details of that conversation that followed. I do remember the disappointment in America that my dad felt at that moment. And though I didn't understand it, I also felt it in that moment. The next reflection is not necessarily on Dr. King, but on my own racism. I grew up in Kenya, and in high school, having high school conversation with a friend, used a slang term when referring to an African friend, and that's when I learned that that particular slang term was not slang but derogatory. And it's not like a slang term I knew or swear word or the N word. It seemed innocent until my classmate pointed out to me that it wasn't, that it had a history, and language is important. And I learned that ignorance can be just as hurtful as willfulness. A few years later, I returned to the US for college, and very quickly, really within days, saw that there was more than one America, that as I was adapting to this culture, to this community, that the experience I was having, even as a TCK, having grown up outside the US, the experience I was having was dissimilar to African Americans and others who were in this country. And that was disheartening and confusing. The ideal of America is so positive, and how could it be that in this country there could be people having such different experiences? And so I began to explore that on my own. And I remember watching Eyes on the Prize, BBC, or no, sorry, PBS documentary on the civil rights movement. And if you haven't seen Eyes on the Prize or similar docuseries, I'm not sure how American you are. I think if we only understand parts of our history, we are at a huge disadvantage, and we've seen that in the last several months in this country. And so I strongly encourage everyone to see Eyes on the Prize. It certainly was impactful to me. I think the most impactful thing, besides just the horror of people's behavior in their interaction with others, what certainly was profound to me was that people who looked just like me were so awful and treated people who looked like my friends horribly, just horribly. The view of young white men screaming at African American children as they tried to go to school was profoundly abhorrent to me. And I remember I watched it in the technology lab at Anderson University, and I remember weeping, crying as I sat in that cubicle watching those videos. Um, it shattered my view of what America was. Gave me hope. Hope always lingers for what America can be, um, but it definitely broke my heart. And those years, the profound influence of Director Moorhead at Anderson, as well as Professor Pyle, who challenged me and gave me opportunities to expand my knowledge and learning, and their compassion as they directed us through our learning was profound. Um, it was during that time that I attended my first Martin Luther King celebration, shortly after, maybe the first year after it was declared a national holiday by President Reagan. I attended an event in Anderson um, celebrating his birth and calling for reconciliation in our community. As the Director of International Student Services, I had the unique privilege of working alongside the Director of Multicultural Student Services at Anderson University for nearly 10 years, and got to share in the planning and preparation and carrying out of Martin Luther King celebrations, as well as Black History Month events, and the learning each of those opportunities carries, as well as the discussion with students year after year, both African American students as well as other students of color, as well as white students, as they learned and experienced things for the first time in that college environment. While working at the university, I obviously participated and attended Martin Luther King celebrations every year. Was honored to be on stage several times, engaged in the process of preparing a word of encouragement for a community each year. For my time as a school administrator, my greatest regret, really, it's a shame on me that I didn't incorporate Dr. King celebrations in our high school setting. I was a principal. It was within my purview. Our school is located overseas, but it's an American school, and the oversight of not putting forward that part of our history is a shame on me. And I certainly encourage international schools around the world to celebrate Dr. King and his birthday and that holiday, and take the opportunity for learning within your community. It's so profound, and for TCKs especially, it's so important to understand that history. And now that history is repeating itself because of our ignorance. And we really can't allow that to happen in educational settings. Now, as I reflect on this holiday and on the celebrations, it's my greatest pride to see my son engaged in Dr. King celebrations. His writing of a response to the letter from Birmingham jail from a white moderate is a profound work. And that it's my kid is it's amazing, and goes to show that that given space, God can do amazing things. And certainly Dominic's words there have been very impactful to me. To see him perform that at a Martin Luther King celebration in Anderson was absolutely one of the highlights of my life. And this year, again, for Dr. King's celebration, I know he has a new word to bring with some friends, and I'm looking forward to sing that celebration later today. I've seen people this year emboldened by leadership, emboldened by ignorance. And that's shocking to me in America, that we somehow have lost sight of how important learning is. That we've lost sight of how important we are to each other. And so on this Martin Luther King Day, I want to encourage you to learn, to read, to watch, as I have for every year, probably since the 5th grade. I embrace my ignorance and recognize that I certainly do not know everything I need to know, and that my living with my brothers and sisters requires more of me than I probably gave this year. And so, again, as we remember a man who sacrificed his life for this country, no greater patriot has done any more. We owe it to ourselves. You owe it to yourself to understand that history, to remind yourself of those dark days, so that we stop repeating ourselves and move quickly forward toward the day when all of our children, Black and white, can live together and be judged by the content of their character, not by the color of their skin. Happy Dr. Martin Luther King Day. Blessings on you and your family.